The Third Reich was collapsing, but the Rhine remained, the ultimate psychological and physical barrier protecting the German heartland. To the German High Command, the Rhine was not just a river, it was a myth, an uncrossable moat that had protected Germany for centuries. At Remagen stands the Ludendorff Bridge, a massive steel structure that is now the last hope for retreating German forces. The generals and their bunkers are calm. Their maps show every bridge from Holland to Switzerland wired for demolition. They believe they hold the power of life and death over these structures. Their arrogance lies in the conviction that they can control the timing of destruction to the second, never imagining that the decadent Americans could move faster than a German fuse.
The mistake at Remagen began with paperwork. Hitler had issued a paranoid decree. Any officer who blew a bridge too early, leaving German troops stranded on the wrong side, would face execution. This created a climate of terror and indecision. At Remagen, the commanders were paralyzed by bureaucracy. They had the explosives, they had the detonators, but they lacked the courage to act without a signed order from above. While they debated the exact millisecond for destruction, they underestimated the speed of the American 9th Armored Division. The German generals believed the Americans would follow the traditional rules of war, halting to regroup before a major river crossing. They didn't realize they were no longer fighting a war of rules, but a race against time. Intelligence at Remagen was a disaster masked as certainty. The German commanders relied on reports that placed the Americans far to the west, bogged down in the Eifel Mountains. They viewed the American army as a lumbering giant, slow and reliant on massive logistics. They won't be here for days, they told themselves. This arrogance allowed for a fatal relaxation of the Guard. They spent their time organizing the retreat of local administrative staff rather than preparing the final blast. The mirage of safety was so strong that they even used civilian-grade explosives because the military-grade supplies were being saved for more important targets. They were preparing for a controlled demolition, oblivious to the fact that a lightning strike was already descending upon them. At 1 p.m. on March 7th, the illusion shattered. American tanks from the 9th Armored Division appeared on the heights above the town. To the Germans, it was a ghost army appearing out of thin air. How could they be here so soon? The German arrogance, the belief that they controlled the pace of the war, was annihilated in a single moment. Panic replaced bureaucracy. Orders were screamed over the radio, but it was too late. The Americans weren't stopping to regroup. They were charging down the hills at full speed. The German commanders realized that the 10 minutes they thought they had were now down to seconds. The gateway to Germany was wide open, and the keys were about to be snatched. This is the moment history changed. The German commander finally gave the order, "Blow it." The plunger was pushed. A roar echoed across the Rhine. But as the smoke cleared, the impossible remained. The bridge was still there. The improvised explosives and the faulty wiring, the result of overconfidence in their equipment, had failed to bring down the massive steel structure. The Germans had relied on a perfect system that was actually a mess of shortcuts and low-grade materials. They stood in shock, watching as the American infantry began to run across the span. The invincible Rhine Barrier was held together by a failed fuse and 10 minutes of wasted time. It was a scene of pure desperation. American soldiers, led by Lieutenant Karl Timmerman, sprinted across the bridge, knowing it could blow at any second. On the German side, the arrogance had turned into a paralyzing fear. They had spent weeks bragging about the Remagen fortress, yet they couldn't even stop a handful of infantry from crossing the river. The backup fuses failed. The soldiers in the towers, who were supposed to be the elite guard, found themselves outfought by amateurs who didn't know when to quit. The Germans had underestimated the individual initiative of the American soldier, a factor that no map or bureaucratic order could ever account for. Within hours, the impossible had become reality. The U.S. Army had established a bridgehead on the eastern bank of the Rhine. The German High Command in Berlin was in a state of cardiac arrest. they had lost the Rhine. Not because they were outgunned, but because they were outthought. Their arrogance had convinced them that the river was a shield, allowing them to be lazy with their defenses. Now, the heart of Germany was exposed. American tanks were no longer miles away. They were on the sacred soil of the Reich. The generals who had delayed the orders were now looking for someone to blame, while the American engineers worked feverishly to reinforce the bridge that the Germans couldn't destroy.
Hitler's reaction was predictable, a bloodbath of his own officers. He ordered the immediate execution of 5 officers involved in the Remagen disaster. To the Nazi leadership, the failure at the bridge was treason, not a result of their own broken command structure. They still couldn't admit that their own rules had caused the delay. The flying court-martials were dispatched to the front to restore order through terror. But executing your own experts doesn't rebuild a bridge or stop an invading army. This scene highlights the total moral and strategic bankruptcy of the German leadership. Their arrogance wouldn't allow for a mistake, so they chose murder instead, further gutting the experience of their dwindling officer corps. In a fit of desperate arrogance, the Germans did something they had never done before. They fired V-2 ballistic missiles at their own territory. They targeted the Remagen Bridge, hoping a miracle weapon would undo their 10-minute mistake. They launched 11 rockets at the bridge. It was a testament to their belief that technology could solve any problem created by poor leadership. But the V-2s were inaccurate. They hit the town, they hit civilians, they hit their own troops, but they never hit the bridge. The American bridgehead continued to grow, fueled by thousands of troops and vehicles pouring across the Rhine. The wonder weapon was a hollow gesture, a loud noise masking a silent defeat. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, was ordered to destroy the bridge at any cost. They sent everything, including the world's first operational jet bombers, the Arado 234 and Me 262 jets. The German generals were certain that their superior aviation technology would surely succeed where the engineers had failed. But the Americans had turned Remagen into the most heavily defended anti-aircraft zone in history. Every German attack was met by a wall of lead. The arrogance of the Luftwaffe commanders, who believed their jets were untouchable, led to the loss of their few remaining elite pilots. The bridge remained standing, a steel finger pointing directly at Berlin, while the German air defense disintegrated into nothingness. 10 days after its capture, the Ludendorff Bridge finally succumbed to the damage and collapsed into the river. The German propaganda machine tried to claim it as a victory, but it was another delusion. By the time the bridge fell, the Americans had already built several heavy-duty pontoon bridges across the Rhine. They had moved entire divisions across. The collapse of the stone and steel didn't matter anymore. The psychological barrier of the Rhine was gone forever. The German generals had focused so much on the physical bridge that they failed to see the bridgehead was now an unstoppable force. Their 10-minute mistake had already cost them the war. Remagen was the miracle of the Rhine. It shortened the war by months and saved countless lives, but only on the Allied side. For the Germans, it was the final proof that their system was broken. The arrogance of their generals, the paralyzing fear of Hitler's orders, and the failure of their perfect technology all converged at one bridge. From Remagen, the road to Berlin was a straight line. The German army was in a state of total collapse, unable to form a new defensive line. They had lost the river, they had lost their pride, and they had lost their 10-minute race with destiny. The Rhine was no longer a shield, it was a highway for the liberation of Europe. Today, the towers of Remagen stand as a museum, a reminder of the day the Rhine failed to protect a crumbling empire. It stands as a monument to the fact that no fortress is impenetrable if the leadership within is blinded by its own ego. The German mistake at Remagen wasn't just about explosives. It was about the 10 minutes they wasted believing they were still in control of history. In war, as in life, The bridge between victory and defeat is often measured in seconds, and those who hesitate out of pride will find themselves standing on the wrong side of the river as the world passes them by.